All right, well, we're here with part 2, which we're titling Correcting Our Kids. And I know for me personally, figuring out how do I shape both of my boys, how do I correct them well? I mean, there's varied levels of success. I could tell you so many stories where I did it wrong, where my emotions got the best of me, and I'll walk away from it and go, yeah, that was not it. And then there's, a handful of times where I know, man, that one went well. That felt like a win and a success. So as we talk about this from the whole overarching concept of domino parenting, where we're trying to set up, you call it, going from potential energy to kinetic energy, that we're putting things in motion as parents and trying to set ourselves up for success and to help shape and raise our kids to love Jesus, to love others well, and to be disciples. Correction fits into that. That's part of the process, right? And so for me personally, I'll lead off with this question. For me, correcting can feel like I'm just repeating myself all the time. It's an uphill battle. How many times do I have to say this? I mean, I've said that to my kids. How many times do I have to tell you? So it can feel like we're repeating ourselves. So what are we looking for when it comes to correction? Can you just kind of lay the foundation of what is correction trying to accomplish?
Yeah. So when we look at our family structure, right? When we have a family structure and our kids start to push up against the kind of parameters that we've set, right? We have boundaries, we have expectations, we have rules, and kids are kind of always going to push up against those. I mean, that's kind of the nature of kids, right? Is to figure out the limits and the extent of how they perform within those limits. And so when they deviate, when they go off course, and they're testing, right? We get to show up in a way that helps recorrect their attempts to figure out themselves in the midst of the rules and the boundaries. I mean, essentially, I tell people often that the law requires rebellion, otherwise it's irrelevant. And so we put up boundaries to promote, to proliferate, to encourage and edify the expressions of our kiddos, right? And so part of when they violate a boundary, like hitting one another, I know your kids have, I know my kids do it, that when they hit one another, they hurt one another, they do something that's a means of pushing outside of the boundaries that we've set for them. The idea that we correct them because we want to continue to grow our usness, the intimacy, the uniqueness of our system, so that it goes and replicates outside of that. I mean, really, correction is just a form of discipline, discipleship, right? So we want to disciple our children in the ways that will be helpful to the kingdom, helpful to their friendships, helpful to themselves, in a way that continues body life, right? So you and I've talked about this before, where if the idea would be if I step on your toe and it hurts, or if I break your toe, right? You're not thinking about your nose. No. Yeah. And if I did that, what would you say?
I'd say, "Ow! Please don't do that again."
Yeah, you would tell me it hurts, right? Yeah. You know exactly what hurts, and you'd tell me that it hurts. And then what would you expect that I would say?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, this is a good rule, see, right? You'd expect I feel bad and say I'm sorry. And then what would you expect going forward?
That you would try not to do that again?
Absolutely. The basic premise of healthy relating is what I call that. Ow, sorrow, change. And when we do a good job creating that in our system, we have something to fall back on when there's those deviations, when they're testing the boundaries, right? Yeah. And honestly, Jordan, that comes from 2 Corinthians chapter 7. Where Paul's talking about godly sorrow and worldly sorrow. Yeah, and it's really beautiful. I'll read it real quick. I quote it real quick. He says, at first I was regretful because I thought my letter hurt you, to the church of Corinth, right? He says, but now you were made sorry as God intended, and so you weren't harmed in any way by us. Because godly sorrow leads to repentance and eventual salvation and leads no regret. But worldly sorrow leads to death. He was concerned, right? He was concerned that his letter forced pain in the church. So you and I have to have this in mind, right? When we show up and we're going to correct, we're going to be assertive and clear about the boundary violations. Are we forcing pain in our kiddos? Because worldly sorrow, forceful sorrow, leads to death. It's destructive. It creates rebellion. It does all these things. But when we give the idea, when we connect with our kids first, and we say, this isn't okay. This isn't what Steingravers do. We're kind, honest, and true. We're loving, helpful, and we don't quit. When we show up in that space and we say, they get to feel bad on their own, naturally. It's like the ow, sorrow, change deal. They will change because we're built for unity. As we've said before, we're built for unity. What are they gonna align with? How many times do I have to tell you?
Yeah.
That's not an alignment.
No, it's not.
That's forceful sorrow.
Yeah, so
I do that too.
Yeah, and I'm sure every parent who's watching would or listening has said something similar.
Of course.
Right? We were at the pool a couple weeks ago, and there was a dad who repeated himself over and over and over again. And I should have gone up and said, "Hey, man, I see you. I've been there." But it's just kind of a universal law of parenting is the repetition.
Yes.
So you've used this really catchy phrase of connection before correction. So can you? And I love that paradigm of worldly sorrow versus how does 2 Corinthians set it up?
Godly sorrow versus worldly sorrow. Yeah.
So if we're trying to inspire a healthy sorrow of, oh, I'm sorry that I did that, and then that inspires change. You say that starts with connection. Give us some strategies for what are we trying to do there? How do we connect before we correct? I mean, there's so many ways to go down this part, but like even in our own parenting journey, how do we regulate our emotions so that we pause just long enough to think, connect before correct?
Yeah, so this goes right back to the idea of mirroring, right? What are we going to have them unify with? Like that we're built for unity. What are they going to connect with for us? So if I'm real big and bad, and that's obviously not going to feel really safe to connect with, they're just going to do whatever they need to do to survive the interchange, right? So I need to, the idea that I need to be regulated 100%, plank before the speck, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So I'm going to take care of myself, and if I need a timeout, I'm going to announce it, guys. I got to take a breath. I got to take a timeout myself. I'll be right back.
Yep.
And I come and I show that, because guess what? Here comes the discipline again for my own stuff, right? What are they going to see? They're going to see me take time for myself, and then they're going to want to, at some point want to replicate that. But the other thing is, if we try to correct them in the midst of them being emotional, we try to use a language of logic in a position of emotion, they're not going to hear it. So we have to connect on the level of what the language is.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I think in the last episode I talked about Addie was upset, and I was on the stairs with her.
Yep.
I had to get down there, and I talked about my own feelings, right? I talked about my own feelings to be vulnerable with her so that she could connect with that and be vulnerable back. If I start just talking to her about logical things, rational things, practical, just do things right now, she's not going to hear it. She's probably going to continue to say, I have feelings that everyone still needs to know.
Yeah.
Really, in those moments too, they're asking for help. It's a bid, right? For help. So what am I doing? Am I telling them to go pound sand and go fix it themselves, or am I going to show up? Yeah. Whether it's a young kid, 4-year-old, 5-year-old, or it's a teenager, their bids are still consistent. Yeah. They just look different and maybe less frequent.
Yeah, and you've used this acronym HOPE. So how does HOPE set us up for connecting with our kids? Because I love it, because it gives you a little bit of a formula or a model to walk through the offense, so to speak. Yeah. So I'll use myself as an example. When the boys are fighting and one of them gets out of line, and let's say one of them hits the other person, my impulse gut response would be to just come in, lay down the law. Not to do that. Knock it off. And if I see it again, and I'm just coming in angry myself. Yep. But you're saying that strategy might not be as fruitful. So talk through HOPE and what I should do different.
Yeah, and there's some subjectivity to that, I would say too. Like if there's some like actual threats and there's harm that can actually happen, intensity to intervene makes some sense. Like if they're going to run out in the street, sure. You're not going to have this like process conversation. Yeah. Do you really think that was a great idea? Right. No. But going into that kind of scenario, right? This idea of hope, I define hope as the perspective of future good, right? Real simple, real clean. But if we break it down, like if I'm to offer hope to my kids in the midst of correction, I'm going to honor them, right? I'm going to honor them. I'm going to make sure that they understand that I see where they're at, that who they are belongs, that they matter. They're not just a nuisance or a problem.
And would you even honor the violation that's happened? Hey, I see what happened, and I can understand how you might feel that way.
Yeah.
Would that be part of that process?
Definitely, absolutely. So, like, what's led them to the trigger for them to be upset, and why that was an injustice for them, or something like that. Okay. Yeah, for sure. I love that. Yeah. So the honorability, right, of what's going on. The other thing I like to say is to offer the observation, just like kind of like you were saying. I see this.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Because what you do is you're just going to make a ton of room for them to have the permission to feel. You know.
Yeah. Yep.
You're connecting with their feelings, and then the other great thing is then you get to, once you're connected, you get to offer up the practical kind of opportunity for them to do different.
Yeah.
Would you like to try again, or start over, buddy?
Yep.
And in doing that, that's super powerful too, because just psychologically they'll just okay, or they'll just think about it and they may keep going in the same direction, but it'll give them that opportunity, right?
Yep.
And the final thing is encouragement, right? You want to make sure that you encourage them every time, right?
Yeah.
To go towards something that is more built for the system.
Yep.
Now, all of this has to come back to the baseline of who are you as a family? What do you represent as Steingrabbers, as Lehmans, as whoever? And what is it then in the moment? Because if you're trying to correct them, they don't have anything to fall back on. They're just going to go to the habits, right? What are the habits they have? So that's really important.
Yeah. I really like the idea of the end of that. Let's practice this. Let's do something, because I think as we talk about being disciples, as we talk about following Jesus, it's a practice. It's something you have to do. And so I love the idea of saying, hey, here's the ideal, here's the goal, here's the violation, the boundary, but here's also how we're going to give you a chance to do this right, and then reinforce it. Because I think even for me as an adult, sometimes it's like, oh, did I do that right? Is that what people mean when they say da-da-da-da? But to actually have practice and go, no, I know this is right because I've done it before. I think it's such a great foundation. And I know for me as a parent, I don't do that enough to go, hey, let's try that again. Like, I'm going to give you, like, that's parenting, right? I'm going to give you the space, the freedom, the safety to go, let's try again. That's okay. We didn't get it right.
Yeah.
And so when they're older, they're not making those mistakes that they could have been correcting younger. And
how do, like, the other thought that just is occurring to me, it's like, how do we model apology? How do we show our kids how to apologize? Yeah. I was just thinking about a time where the kids were doing something and they dropped something and it was really loud and it startled me. I said, hey! I yelled it because it really startled me. Yeah. And Camden started to cry. And I went right over to him. I knew exactly what I went right over to him. I'm like, buddy, did that scare you? And he was crying, yeah. And I'm like, oh, bud, I'm so sorry. Yeah. I'm so sorry. Yep. Like, you deserve to feel okay, you know? And so the idea of, like, how do I apologize? How do I represent empathy? How do I show up in a way that says you get to have feelings and it's right that you feel like you do, and here's who you are. Here's who you are. Yeah. Because pain validates connection. So if you're going to connect to your kids, right, if you can name the pain, you have to name it. Otherwise, it's not going anywhere. You got nothing to direct, right? You name what you want to change, because if you don't name it, you won't change it, okay? So the idea with this is, like, you go in the place of pain, right? If I step on your toe, as I said before, your toe hurts. Yeah. You know it hurts. Yep. Kids don't have that continuity yet. Right. So we go in there and we show up and we say, I bet you feel stuck. Yep. You feel bad, mad, glad, scared. Give them the word so that we can do something with it. Yep. Turn it into something disciplined, right?
Yeah. Which the example that comes to mind is my youngest son recently got his tonsils and adenoids removed. And so we have been giving him so much more attention because he's in a world of physical pain. And so it's like he gets treats all the time. He's eating popsicles like at 9 a.m. We're like, you want a popsicle? Great, like go for it, which is normally not our how we roll. But after the first couple of days of this, I could just sense our oldest Harvey. I could just sense him like feeling left out and bummed out because. And so I asked him. We were going somewhere, just the two of us. And I said, "Hey, are you kind of bummed out? Do you feel like we're giving Cohen more attention than you?" Yeah. Is that bothering you? Like, and not to say I did it perfectly by any stretch, but I noticed that even in that moment, because he'd been acting up. He was more emotional. Harvey was, and he was tending to be more sassy and disrespectful and demanding and entitled. Like all these things were coming out, but then I got the opportunity to pull him aside and go, "Hey, are you feeling this way?" And I was just really glad I did, because it gave us some framework to go, okay, this is affecting you. My hunch is right. Instead of just getting mad at him. And so that was one moment where I was like, oh, this connection, because I've heard you say it before.
Yeah.
Connection before I correct was so helpful.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing I would say with that, Jordan, not to say anything that you did wrong with that, because absolutely naming it, but what are you going to connect it to for him? Because if he knows what he's feeling, if he doesn't know what it, like, if it's not about who he is,
Right.
like, he belongs, he's a part of the system, he's still
Right.
intimately and significantly a part of the Steingravers.
Yeah. Yeah.
So he's desiring intimacy,
Yeah.
like the unique reference of who he is.
Yep.
This is why we pay attention, as I've said before, right? So that, and he's wanting that. He's lost the attention for a time, and so he's decreased of intimacy. He's kind of going up with his kind of reactivity. Yeah.
And it gave me an opportunity to apologize too, to say, buddy, I'm sorry. That's a
Yeah.
bummer. Like, that's
Yeah, for
not
sure.
easy. Like, this is tough, but this is what we get to do to help Cohen for the next couple of weeks.
Because that's what we do.
Yeah.
Kind,
Yeah.
honest, true.
Helpful.
Helpful.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah.
That's okay. So in all of this, we're connecting with our kids before we correct them, but in our correction portion, one of the questions that I think we have to answer is, should we punish our kids? And I think I would ask that question. I'm sure other parents would answer that question. Talk to us a little bit about what is punishment, how is it different from correction or discipline? Unpack that.
Yeah, no punishment.
No punishment. Okay.
No punishment.
Tell us why.
Yeah, no. Punishment is, if you think about back to the 2 Corinthians, right? Punishment is a way of forcing bad feelings so that behavior changes. That's it. It's not to reconcile bad behavior. It's to force bad feelings so that the behavior changes. Discipline and consequence are much different, because discipline, the form of discipleship, is to correct behavior to future action, right? Punishment simply just says, feel bad for this now.
Yeah.
And it's a way of, oftentimes it's forceful or shameful, or it's degrading about who we understand ourselves to be. I mean, I'm sure you've done this, I've done this, where you've said, oh, I'm such an idiot.
Oh, yeah.
But why? Why say that?
It's not helpful. I know that, but I say it because that's how I feel. I feel like I'm just messing it up.
Yeah, you're trying to make yourself feel bad.
Yeah.
But you already feel bad. The kids aren't any different. They already recognize that they've done something wrong, and subsequently, because they're already a part of a system that's going against, they're going to have some sense of discontent. So what we get to do is we create a discipline, and we separate ourselves from our discipline. If this continues, right, I have what I call the tiers of discipline. There's 3 elements. I'll hit them real quick because they're simple. The first one is boundary establishment and maintenance. You make it really clear. It's not okay to hit your brother.
Boundary establishment and maintenance.
Yep.
Okay.
So I'm gonna say, this is the boundary, and then I'm gonna give 1 or 2 violations. Yeah, it's not okay. This isn't okay. Maintenance, right? Then the second one is consequence delegation. It's where we give consequence, not punishment. Often it's time sensitive. Buddy, you can't have your tablet for the rest of the day.
Yep.
Or whatever it is, right? And another really big important one is that you give your kids opportunity to participate in that. Buddy, that's not okay. So what do you think is a good consequence for this? What's an appropriate one? And you're separating yourself with this. You're delegating their ability to do this on their own, right? So that's and any time you go through the tiers, you say, I don't want this for you. I'd like you to make a decision that represents who you are, man. You can do this. You've got this. Hope, right? And then the third one is the non-reclaimable consequence. Something that is a permanent kind of, you lose an event. You don't get to go to a birthday party or something, and that's like the end of all ends, right? Like, you've gone through all the process, and this is the consequence for it. You think about it, this represents a lot of what happens in life, right? You don't show up to work. Well, there's a that's not okay. You need to show up on time, or whatever, and it continues to progress until you lose your job, right? And so in so doing, the discipline, the discipleship of correction, right, has to have some kind of predictability, reliability, consistency with it, so that the kids know that they get to deviate in an appropriate way, healthy way, but they got to come back to what's expected.
I love that. I think it's so helpful to have tools like that, because I think in this phrase, I just want to zoom in on this for a second, is disconnect yourself or distance yourself, I think is what you said, from the discipline, from the consequence, where you're setting your kids up. And we've done this sometimes, and it's so helpful to say, hey, here are your options in front of you. Here's, if you keep going down this road, if you continue, what will happen if you keep doing this? And I do ask this with my boys. This is something I've been really practicing, is to go like, hey, it seems like you're doing this. What do you think is going to what's going to happen if you keep doing that? I'll probably I think you're probably right. So what do you think we should do instead?
Question.
And so then they'll go, I should probably do this. Yeah, I think so too. I think that's a great decision if you don't want X, Y, or Z to happen. And so that also helps me maintain, just anecdotally, a sense of calm, because then it's not me coming in with the hammer to say, now you've wakened the bear, and now all these things come down. Instead, it's, hey, what are you going to choose? Which hopefully sets them up for future success as adults. The example you said, hey, you going to show up to work on time? Hopefully they're building that. So as we think about correction, and you even give us that acronym HOPE, you've talked about this before, this idea of correction as restoration, that you're trying to bring reconciliation to relationships. And so in the process of helping our kids navigate this, and even for us as adults, what are we aiming for? What is the relational component of correction? What are we aiming for?
Okay, so I'll start with the family. So the word intimacy, I keep using that word, right? Family systems, our families have our own form of usness and intimacy, right? So in grad school, we used to say intimacy was in-to-me-see, right? Like a sentence. It's a deep understanding or unique or special knowledge. So when our kids, or when we are in a form of being not part of a system, or we're not contributing to the family system, the usness, right? The correction, the reconciliation is to say, okay, where am I missing this? What's the broken toe, right, as it were? Like like I'm going to attend to that, right? So that we can come back to right action, that we can improve our impact, the function of the body, right?
I love that idea of missing the usness, where as you're correcting, that you're inviting them back into family function, so to speak. And it even comes back to some of the mottos or the family values, where it's like, hey, that's not who we are as a family. Let's come back in, that the correction is a part of that. And you've mentioned Ephesians 4 as a part of what we're looking at as a family. Can you talk about that for a second?
Paul talks about being members of one body, right? And so in Ephesians 4, it's pretty popular, but he says, in your anger, do not sin. I remember a guy years ago, one of our mutual friends, he defined sin as just it's a God-absent direction, right? And I love that. I'm like, so simple. So when we sin against one another, we're going in a relationship-absent direction, selfishness, right? So Paul says, in your anger, do not sin. Not get angry, it says do not sin. Don't let the sun go down where it's angry, right? So which is to say, deal with it quickly. And then he says, don't let the devil have a foothold. And then he goes on right after that, he says, he who has been stealing must steal no longer, but must put his own hands to work that he might have something to benefit those in need. When I'm angry, who's it about? It's all about me. Selfish, relationship absent direction. My kids practice that on a daily level. It's all about them, right? So part of the job is, how do I keep them coming back to usness?
I love that.
Because they're going to replicate that kind of format in their own lives and with their own families and their friendships.
Yeah, I love that. That's such a beautiful way, and maybe that's, as we walk away from this conversation, hopefully those acronyms sit with us for a while. You even use the phrase, I love it, like something to chew on. It's a chewy phrase, but I think come back to usness is a really cool way to end this. And so, Dustin, as we wrap up part 2, thanks for your time and your energy, and what a great way to end it.
Love it. Thanks.